They tried to silence her, but she became the most powerful woman in media history. Subscribe to BlackJourney and discover more stories of Black resilience and power. The story of Oprah Winfrey does not begin with red carpets, billion-dollar contracts, or magazine covers. It begins in the red soil of Mississippi, in a tiny house where poverty was not just a circumstance, but a constant shadow. Oprah Gayle Winfrey was born on January 29, 1954, in Kosciuszko, Mississippi, to a teenage mother who worked as a housemaid. Her mother, Vernita Lee, was barely prepared for motherhood, and her father, Vernon Winfrey, was absent in those early years. From her very first breath, the odds were stacked against her. She was Black, she was poor, she was a girl. In mid-20th century America, each of those things was a barrier. Together, they were chains. Oprah's earliest years were filled with hardship. Raised by her grandmother, Hattie Mae, she wore dresses sewn from potato sacks, an image that would later haunt her when schoolmates mocked her. Yet while her body bore the weight of poverty, her spirit was being quietly nurtured. Her grandmother taught her to read before she was 3 years old, sitting her down with the Bible and filling her young mind with words far bigger than her world. In that tiny rural home, Oprah discovered something that no one could take away from her: language. Words became her refuge, her weapon, her light in a world of shadows. But poverty is relentless. When her grandmother grew ill, Oprah was sent to live with her mother in Milwaukee. What awaited her there was not stability, but pain. In the crowded, harsh inner city, Oprah's childhood innocence was shattered by abuse. She suffered in silence, violated by people she should have been able to trust. By the time she was 14, she had endured more than most adults could bear. When she became pregnant as a teenager, her world seemed ready to collapse completely. Her baby, born prematurely, died shortly after birth. For many, that would have been the end of the story, a life crushed before it began. But something within, Oprah refused to surrender. The pain did not destroy her, it sharpened her hunger to rise. When she went to live with her father in Nashville, Vernon Winfrey, a strict disciplinarian, demanded more from her than anyone ever had. He required her to read a book a week, to write reports, to excel. In that discipline, Oprah found structure, and in structure, she found possibility. Her father saw in her what poverty and abuse had tried to erase. Brilliance, Oprah's talent for speaking, revealed itself early. She was a natural storyteller, a girl who could stand in front of a crowd and make words come alive. By the time she was in high school, she was excelling in speech competitions and working at a local radio station. Her voice carried both authority and vulnerability, a combination that drew people in. She was not pretending to be polished or perfect. She was raw, real, and utterly captivating. Yet, even as her career began to show sparks, she was still a young Black woman in a world that did not want to see her shine. Television newsrooms in the 1970s were not built for Black women, especially not ones with natural hair, deep emotions, and a way of speaking that was more Southern warmth than stiff professionalism. When Oprah got her first television job as Idem, a co-anchor at a Nashville station, she was told she was too emotional. In a business that worshipped cold detachment, her habit of caring too deeply for the people in her stories was seen as a flaw. But that very flaw would later become her greatest gift. Oprah's journey through those early years was not one of straight success. She stumbled, she was demoted. She was told again and again that she was not enough. Her body, her voice, her emotions, all were criticized. But while doors closed, her determination grew stronger. She had been underestimated her entire life, and she knew that the very things people dismissed in her, the rawness, the tears, the openness, were not weaknesses. They were truths. And truth, Oprah would one day prove, has the power to move nations. By the time she was in her early 20s, Oprah had carved a space for herself in local media. But what truly set her apart was not just her presence, it was her ability to connect. She could sit across from anyone, a politician, a grieving mother, a child with a dream, and make them feel seen. People trusted her because she was not just delivering news, She was sharing humanity. This authenticity, born of suffering and resilience, became her signature. But success was not yet guaranteed. She was still a young woman climbing in an industry where almost no one looked like her at the top. She had to fight for every opportunity, to prove again and again that she was worthy of the spotlight. Yet the girl who once wore potato sack dresses had already learned how to stand tall in humiliation. The teenager who had survived abuse had already learned how to carry pain without letting it define her. The young mother who had buried her baby had already learned the depth of grief. By the time she entered the cutthroat world of television, Oprah had faced storms that would have broken many, and that resilience was her secret weapon. As the 1970s faded into the 1980s, Oprah Winfrey stood at a crossroads. She was working in television, gaining recognition, but still searching for her true place. The industry wanted anchors who looked like statues and spoke like robots. But Oprah was no statue, and she would never be a robot. She was flesh and blood, laughter and tears, strength and vulnerability. She was human in a business that feared humanity. And it was only a matter of time before the world realized that this was not her weakness, but her power. Her story, even at this early stage, was not just about personal ambition. It was about something larger, the hunger of a people who had been told they could not rise. Oprah's rise would not just be her own, it would be a beacon to millions of Black women who had been silenced, overlooked, dismissed. It would be proof that dignity could be reclaimed, that voices could not be erased, that pain could be turned into power. The journey from the dirt roads of Mississippi to the billion-dollar empire that awaited her was still far from over. The world had not yet seen the full force of Oprah Winfrey, but already the seeds were planted. Already the girl who had nothing was becoming a woman who would give everything. Already the story of one of the most powerful women in history was being written, not in ink, but in fire. By the early 1980s, Oprah Winfrey's journey had already been marked by struggle and resilience, but destiny was only beginning to unfold. She had climbed her way through local radio and television, always balancing between rejection and recognition. At 22, she became the first Black female co-anchor at Nashville's WLAC-TV. But even with that achievement, she was treated as though she didn't belong. Some colleagues mocked her appearance, criticizing her weight and natural hair. Executives told her to change her style, to tone down her emotions, to mold herself into someone less real. But Oprah, though young, had already survived enough storms to know that authenticity was her lifeline. Her real breakthrough came when she moved to Baltimore to co-host People Are Talking in 1976. This was not a prim, detached news show. It was a talk program, alive with energy, laughter, and raw conversation. For the first time, Oprah's emotional style wasn't a liability. It was a gift. Audiences were captivated by her warmth, her ability to listen, and her knack for drawing out the deepest truths from her guests. She was not just a host, she was a mirror reflecting humanity back to itself. People tuned in not because she told them what to think, but because she made them feel. Yet behind her growing success, she still fought battles of self-worth. She had moments of insecurity about her body, her background, and her place in a world that seemed to worship perfection. At times she doubted herself, but every time the camera's red light switched on, Oprah's doubts faded. She belonged in that space, not because she was flawless, but because she was real. And America was hungry for real. In 1983, opportunity came calling from Chicago. A struggling morning talk show, AM Chicago, needed new life. When Oprah was offered the chance to host, she took the leap, moving to a city where she was unknown, in a market dominated by giants. At the time, AM Chicago was losing badly in ratings, especially against Phil Donahue, the reigning king of daytime talk. Few believed Oprah could turn the show around, but the moment Oprah stepped onto that Chicago stage, the game changed. She transformed AM Chicago into something electric. Viewers felt an intimacy with her, as though she were sitting in their living room. She laughed with them, cried with them, and never shied away from difficult conversations. Within months, AM Chicago went from last place to the #1 talk show in the city. For the first time, people began to realize that Oprah Winfrey was not just another television host. She was a force. Her rise in Chicago was meteoric, but it wasn't just about entertainment. Oprah was using television as a bridge, bringing together people of different races, classes, and experiences, and making them see one another's humanity. She tackled issues of racism, sexism, poverty, and injustice, not with detached analysis, but with compassion and truth. She was not afraid to expose her own wounds, to admit her struggles with weight, or to speak about her painful past. And that vulnerability, so rare in television, became her superpower. By 1986, the show had grown so popular that it was syndicated nationally under a new name, The Oprah Winfrey Show. This was more than a career milestone. It was a revolution. A black woman, born in poverty, abused as a child, mocked for her looks, was about to take over daytime television, a space historically reserved for white hosts. When the first national broadcast aired on September 8, 1986, America was officially introduced to the woman who would redefine the medium. But success did not silence critics. Many dismissed her as a passing fad, suggesting her popularity would never last. Some reduced her appeal to spectacle, sneering that her emotional style catered only to gossip. Others whispered that a black woman could not hold national audiences for long. Yet Oprah proved them wrong day after day, year after year. Her show became the highest-rated daytime talk show in American history, running for 25 seasons and reaching over 40 million viewers a week in the United States alone. Around the globe, her influence was even larger. Still, beneath the glamour, Oprah never forgot where she came from. She knew what it meant to grow up poor, to feel invisible, to be silenced. And she brought those memories into her work. Her platform became a voice for the voiceless. She invited ordinary people onto her stage and made their stories matter. She gave space to survivors, to dreamers, to the broken and the brave. Her show wasn't just entertainment, it was healing. But Oprah was also ambitious, in the deepest sense of the word. She didn't want just to host a show. She wanted ownership. She wanted power, not just on screen, but behind it. Too often, black talent had been exploited by industries that took their faces but denied them control. Oprah refused to be a pawn. She negotiated not just for salary, but for rights. By 1988, she founded Harpo Productions, her own production company. It was an audacious move, a black woman, building a media empire in an industry dominated by white men. But Oprah was no longer playing by the rules of others. She was writing her own. With Harpo, Oprah became one of the first black women in America to own and produce her own talk show. Every contract, every production, every deal now carried her imprint. She wasn't just a star, she was an empire builder. This decision would become the cornerstone of her billion-dollar fortune. But more than that, it was a statement. Ownership is power. Through her Chicago studio, she produced not only The Oprah Winfrey Show, but also films, books, and new ventures that expanded her reach. One of the earliest triumphs was her role in The Color Purple, 1985, where her performance earned critical acclaim and an Academy Award nomination. For Oprah, this was not just an acting role, it was a chance to honor the stories of black women whose voices had been silenced for generations. By the end of the 1980s, Oprah was no longer just a television host. She was a cultural force, a symbol of resilience and a beacon of what was possible. Millions of people, especially black women, looked at her and saw themselves reflected in places they had never been allowed to stand. She was living proof that poverty could be defeated, that trauma could be transformed, and that dignity could be reclaimed. But success did not shield her from ongoing discrimination. Behind the applause, Oprah still encountered boardrooms where she was underestimated, networks where she was doubted, and headlines where her worth was reduced to stereotypes. Yet each barrier she faced only deepened her determination. She had not survived abuse, loss, and humiliation, just to be silenced by prejudice at the height of her career. She would continue to rise, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told they were too poor, too black, too broken to dream. As the 1990s approached, Oprah was stepping into uncharted territory. She was no longer simply a media personality. She was becoming an institution. Her talk show was dominating ratings. Her production company was growing, and her voice was shaping the cultural conversation. But her story was still unfolding, and her journey was far from over. Because the girl who had once been told she was too emotional was now preparing to use those very emotions to move millions. And the woman who had been told she could never own her destiny was now building a kingdom brick by brick. The world was beginning to understand. Oprah Winfrey was not just part of history. She was making it. By the early 1990s, Oprah Winfrey was no longer just a household name in America. She was a global presence. Her show reached into living rooms across continents, translating not only language but emotion. Wherever it aired, people saw a woman who did not hide her humanity, who embraced her flaws and allowed her vulnerability to shine. Viewers from Chicago to South Africa, from London to Lagos, felt a strange intimacy with her. She wasn't just a celebrity, she was family. But along with fame came the weight of responsibility. Oprah knew the magnitude of her platform. She was not blind to the fact that she carried the hopes of millions, especially black women who had rarely seen themselves reflected on television with such dignity and power. She was a torchbearer, and with that role came scrutiny. Every choice she made, what she wore, what she said, what she endorsed, was magnified, analyzed, and sometimes weaponized. She bore the burden of representing not just herself but her community. In 1993, she conducted one of the most memorable interviews in television history with Michael Jackson at his Neverland Ranch. Watched by over 90 million people worldwide, it proved that Oprah's reach extended beyond daytime talk. She was shaping culture itself. But it wasn't just the sensational interviews that defined her. It was her commitment to truth. She refused to reduce her show to empty spectacle. Instead, she insisted on tackling real issues: child abuse, domestic violence, racism, poverty, and the struggles of everyday people. Her show became a classroom, a church, a therapy session, and a gathering place all at once. Still, Oprah was not immune to attack. In 1996, she faced one of her fiercest public battles. After airing a program on the dangers of mad cow disease, she was sued by Texas cattlemen for allegedly causing beef prices to drop. The lawsuit dragged her into court for years, threatening not only her reputation but her empire. In those tense moments, Oprah did what she had always done: stood tall. Sitting in a Texas courtroom, she declared with unshakable conviction, "Free speech not only lives, it rocks." When she won the case, it wasn't just a personal victory, it was a landmark moment for freedom of expression. The trial revealed the steel beneath Oprah's warmth. For all her compassion and openness, she was a fighter, unwilling to be bullied into silence. Her victory in Texas was symbolic of her larger journey. A black woman who had once been voiceless, now defending the right to speak for millions. But Oprah's vision stretched beyond ratings and courtrooms. She began to use her wealth and influence in ways that reshaped philanthropy. In 1997, she launched Oprah's Angel Network, a foundation that raised over $80 million for charitable causes. The network funded scholarships, rebuilt homes after disasters, and provided opportunities to children who had none. Oprah didn't just give money, she mobilized people. She taught her audience that giving was not the privilege of the wealthy, it was the responsibility of the human heart. Her philanthropic efforts reached their peak in 2007, with the opening of the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls in South Africa. For years, she had spoken of her belief in education as the pathway to freedom. As a girl who had grown up with nothing, she knew that knowledge was the only inheritance that poverty could never steal. Her academy, built with $40 million of her own money, became a sanctuary for young girls who carried within them the same hunger she once had. Critics questioned her choice to build the school abroad rather than in the US, but Oprah stood firm. To her, it was not about geography, it was about impact. These girls were not just students, They were the future leaders of their nation, and investing in them was investing in the world. Still, Oprah's journey was not without personal battles. Throughout her career, she struggled openly with weight, body image, and self-worth. In a society that idolized thinness, her fluctuating body became tabloid fodder. Yet instead of hiding, Oprah transformed her pain into dialogue. She spoke candidly about diets, exercise, emotional eating, and the deeper wounds that often drive self-destruction. Millions of women found comfort in her honesty, realizing they were not alone in their struggles. Once again, Oprah turned personal vulnerability into collective healing. Her show also became a platform for voices that might never have been heard otherwise. She introduced the world to Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, and Iyanla Vanzant, among others, personalities who went on to shape their own spheres of influence. More importantly, she created space for survivors of abuse, for people living with HIV, for families broken by addiction. She used her stage to amplify the stories that society too often silenced, but perhaps Oprah's most remarkable gift was her ability to merge spirituality with mainstream media. She spoke often about intention, about the power of gratitude, about living one's best life. While critics dismissed her as overly sentimental, her audience knew she was touching on something deeper. In an age of cynicism, she dared to believe in hope. In a world obsessed with materialism, she reminded people of the power of the spirit. Her show became not just entertainment, but a movement urging millions to live consciously, to dream boldly, and to give generously. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Oprah had become more than a host. She was a billionaire, the first Black woman in history to reach that milestone. Forbes crowned her as the queen of all media. Yet for Oprah, wealth was never the end goal. Money was a tool, a resource to be used in service of something greater. She once said, "To whom much is given, much is expected." And she lived by that creed. Still, wealth did not insulate her from the realities of race and gender in America. She faced constant reminders that success did not erase prejudice. In 2005, for instance, she made headlines after being denied entry into a luxury store in Paris, reportedly because the staff assumed she could not afford the items inside. Incidents like this underscored a painful truth. No matter how powerful, wealthy, or respected a Black woman became, discrimination still lurked at the edges of her life. But Oprah, as always, refused to let humiliation define her. Instead, she exposed such moments as reminders of the work still left to do. As she entered the new millennium, Oprah was not slowing down. She was expanding her empire, launching the Oprah magazine, which became one of the most successful magazines of its kind. She produced films, supported authors through her groundbreaking book club, and continued to dominate television. Each venture was not simply about business, it was about impact. When she endorsed a book, it became a bestseller. When she championed a cause, millions rallied behind it. Her influence was seismic, but perhaps her greatest legacy during this era was intangible. It was the shift she brought to the cultural landscape. She made it possible for people to see vulnerability as strength, compassion as power, and authenticity as a form of resistance. She embodied the truth that dignity is not granted by society, it is claimed by the self. By the time she announced in 2009 that the Oprah Winfrey Show would end after 25 seasons, the world was stunned. It was as though a daily ritual, a cultural heartbeat, was coming to an end. But Oprah was never one to rest on old victories. She was preparing for something greater, her own network, a platform that would carry her influence into the future. The girl who once wore dresses sewn from potato sacks was now a global icon. The teenager who had once been silenced by abuse was now one of the most powerful voices on earth. And the woman who had once been told she was too emotional had redefined what it meant to lead with heart. But her journey was not yet complete. As the world entered a new era, Oprah Winfrey stood poised to make her greatest leap yet, not just as a host, not just as a philanthropist, but as a visionary leader who would leave an indelible mark on history. When Oprah Winfrey announced that the Oprah Winfrey Show would come to an end in 2011, It felt as if an era was closing. For 25 years, the show had not only dominated daytime television, but had become a cultural cornerstone. Millions of viewers around the world had turned to her each day, finding comfort, truth, and inspiration in her presence. Yet Oprah knew she was not finished. Her vision was too vast to be contained by a single program. She was ready for a new chapter, one that would test her power, her resilience, and her legacy. That new chapter came in the form of OWN, the Oprah Winfrey Network. Launched in 2011, OWN was her boldest move yet. An entire television network built around her values, her vision, and her brand. Unlike her show, which had begun with modest expectations and grown organically, OWN entered the world under the glare of massive expectations. Everyone assumed that if Oprah touched something, it would turn to gold. But success did not come easily. The early years of OWN were rocky. Ratings were lower than expected. Critics mocked the network as a failure, and some even whispered that Oprah had finally overreached. For a woman who had built her career on trust and connection, it was a painful setback. But Oprah was not a stranger to failure. She had been fired from her first anchor job, mocked for her weight, dismissed for her emotions. She understood that failure was not the end. It was a teacher. And so she doubled down, reshaping the network, investing in new programming, and bringing in voices that resonated with her core audience. Over time, OWN found its rhythm. By the mid-2010s, it was producing award-winning shows, including Ava DuVernay's Queen Sugar, and had secured its place in the media landscape. This moment revealed a truth about Oprah. Her genius was not only in her ability to connect with audiences, but in her refusal to surrender when faced with defeat. She knew that setbacks were simply part of a larger journey. As she once said, "Think like a queen. A queen is not afraid to fail. Failure is another stepping stone to greatness." But Oprah's influence extended far beyond the realm of television. In 2007 and 2008, during the historic campaign of Barack Obama, she made a rare foray into politics. Her public endorsement of him was groundbreaking, signaling the power of her voice in the political arena. Analysts estimated that her support brought Obama over 1 million votes in the Democratic primaries. Yet for Oprah, it was not about politics, as usual. It was about vision, leadership, and the possibility of a nation that could finally elect its first Black president. Watching Obama take the oath of office in 2009, Oprah stood as both witness and participant in history. She had not just chronicled the journey of America, she had helped shape it. Throughout the 2010s, Oprah's role as a cultural elder deepened. She became less of a daily television figure and more of a symbol, a voice called upon in moments of crisis, celebration, and reflection. She interviewed global leaders, artists, and activists, always bringing her signature blend of warmth and truth. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle sought to tell their story of isolation and racism within the British monarchy, they turned to Oprah. Her interview with them in 2021 became one of the most watched and discussed television events of the decade, proving that even after stepping away from daily broadcasting, her voice still carried unparalleled weight. Yet Oprah's legacy cannot be measured simply by ratings or interviews. Her philanthropy has remained central to her life's work. Beyond the Leadership Academy in South Africa, she has poured hundreds of millions into scholarships, community programs, and humanitarian causes. She has been especially dedicated to education, believing that the cycle of poverty can be broken only when young people are given the tools to dream and achieve. She has stood on stages and in classrooms, telling children who came from nothing, as she once did, that their future could be limitless. Even more powerful than her money, however, has been her example. Oprah Winfrey became the embodiment of what it means to rise without forgetting where you come from. She spoke openly about her struggles with abuse, poverty, and self-doubt, not to exploit her past, but to show others that survival is possible. For Black women especially, she became a mirror of possibility, proof that dignity could be claimed even in a world that often denies it. But Oprah's life has not been free of contradiction. She has faced criticism, sometimes for the people she has elevated, sometimes for her focus on personal empowerment in the face of systemic issues. Some have accused her of promoting a feel-good philosophy that oversimplifies structural inequality. Yet even her critics cannot deny her impact. Few individuals in modern history have shaped culture with such depth, consistency, and authenticity. Her story is not simply the tale of one woman's rise. It is the story of what happens when pain is turned into purpose, when silence is broken into speech, when dignity is chosen in the face of humiliation. Oprah Winfrey's life speaks to the broader struggle of Black people in America, fighting against invisibility, demanding justice, and reclaiming humanity. In 2018, during the Golden Globe Awards, Oprah accepted the Cecil B. DeMille Award for Lifetime Achievement. Her speech electrified the world. She spoke of truth, of justice, of the Me Too movement, and of a brighter future for girls everywhere. Her words echoed like a sermon, igniting whispers of a potential presidential run. While Oprah later said she had no interest in seeking political office, the moment revealed something deeper. People trusted her not only as a host but as a moral voice. She had become more than a media figure. She was a global conscience. As she entered her late 60s, Oprah continued to expand her influence. Through Apple TV Plus projects, book clubs, and partnerships, she remained a central figure in cultural conversation. Yet she also embraced a quieter role, mentoring, teaching, and guiding others to carry the torch. She did not need to be everywhere, because her legacy was already everywhere. Today, Oprah Winfrey stands as one of the most influential women in the world, a billionaire, a philanthropist, a media titan. But numbers alone cannot define her. Her true legacy lies in the millions of lives she touched. The little girl who watched her on TV and dared to dream. The survivor who found healing through her honesty. The young leader in South Africa who found a path to education because of her generosity. Her journey from a dirt floor cabin in Mississippi to the pinnacle of global media is more than a personal triumph. It is a testimony to the power of resilience. She showed the world that dignity is not a privilege reserved for the wealthy or powerful. Dignity belongs to those who refuse to be broken, who rise from the ashes of humiliation and declare their worth. For every child who has ever been told they are too poor, too different, or too broken to succeed, Oprah Winfrey's life offers an answer. Your beginning does not determine your end. The story of Oprah Winfrey is the story of possibility, of justice, of a woman who carried the scars of her past and transformed them into the wings of her future. She is indeed the billion-dollar media queen. But more than that, she is a reminder that greatness is not measured by wealth or fame, but by the courage to live with dignity, to speak with truth, and to lead with love. And so her legacy endures, not only on screens or in books, but in the hearts of those who dare like her to rise. And so the legacy of Oprah Winfrey is not just written in television history, nor in the billions she has earned, but in the countless lives she has lifted. Her story is proof that no matter how heavy the chains of poverty, abuse, or discrimination may be, they can be broken. She reminds us that even from the harshest soil, greatness can bloom. If Oprah's journey has moved you, if her rise from silence to power has inspired you, then join us here on BlackJourney, where we honor the voices, struggles, and triumphs of Black lives that shape our world. Subscribe now and be part of a community that refuses to forget the past, celebrates resilience, and believes in the power of dignity and justice.